high-wire act that cheated death more than once.
My only problem then was not falling 15 or 16 floors.
Bill's acrobatics were somewhat legendary. He was very skilled at grappling.
A man nobody really knew.
He just had a look of someone that was not in the straight and narrow.
A performer who didn't want an audience.
I didn't need to say I stole $1 million last night. I didn't need to impress anybody.
A thief who eluded the police for decades.
A master burglar, to say the least. Certainly the best that I ever came across in my career.
He's probably the most successful jewel thief in American history.
There's a mystique about being a jewel thief.
During his 20-year career on the wrong side of the law, Bill Mason estimates he stole about $35 million worth of jewelry before he got caught.
Jewelry's a highly liquid, easily fenced item. You can put a fortune in your pocket.
Today, Bill Mason is 63 years old and says he's out of the business. But every once in a while, the glitter of a diamond bracelet or ring still catches his eye.
I walk by a Graff jewelry store up there on Madison Avenue, and I see a window full of maybe $30 million worth of jewelry, and I say, geez, now, you know, I bet there's a way you could figure this out if you really want to put the time and energy into it.
During his heyday, Mason used mountain climbing equipment to scale high-rise apartments and hotels, usually entering through an unlocked window or balcony door.
I got involved originally for the money, and slowly I became obsessed with the thrill the adrenaline rush that you get from doing some of these high-wire acts.
His work was so flawless that police believed they were dealing with an international gang of burglars instead of one solitary man. He specialized in entering the homes of the rich and famous and happily robbing them blind.
I think I had a resentment against some of these people that flaunted around with trying to impress everybody with their tremendous wealth. Who needs a 22-karat diamond ring on their finger? Why would you buy one? I think it takes them down a peg or two when somebody can figure out a way to beat the system and take that 22-karat diamond ring off their finger.
Writers, singers, movie stars. It didn't matter to Mason. He broke into Bob Hope's hotel room and staked out the vacation home of Elizabeth Taylor.
Truman Capote, I hit probably to the tune of $1,000 worth of gold.
Robert Goulet was another victim.
I did take a watch, which I liked. I wore it myself for years.
And how did it all start? What makes a kid from the Midwest grow up to be a cat burglar?
When I was 10, 11, 12 years old, I mean, I was just a typical boy. I mean, I played football, playing baseball. I was always working. I think shortly after that, I had a paper route. I mean, Sundays, I had 500 customers.
But Mason did have one talent that would serve him well later in his life.
I always loved to climb. I loved to climb anything that was climbable. And heights didn't scare me.
Mason grew up in a middle-class suburb of Cleveland. By all appearances, he was a typical American teenager. After high school, Mason got married and took a job managing apartment buildings, where he learned how locks, keys, and security systems work, and how easily they can be overcome. That was dangerous knowledge for a young father of two who was already having trouble making ends meet.
As a young married man, I thought I needed money, and I did need money. There's no doubt about that.
Mason faced a choice: take another job and earn the money, or get it some other way. He decided he didn't want another job. It wasn't long before he heard about a rich woman who lived alone in an apartment. He started casing the building. One night, Mason noticed the lights were turned off. He decided to take a chance. To make sure the apartment was empty, he called the woman's number and let it ring 10 times. He took the elevator to her floor. Then it was just a matter of picking the lock. As he made his way through the dark apartment, he heard a sound.
And I walked into the bedroom and almost had a heart attack. I guess she was in bed. I could hear her snoring. I could smell a lot of booze around the apartment. So I went ahead and did it anyway.
Mason slipped out of the apartment that night a richer man, and one who'd experienced the thrill of taking something that didn't belong to him without getting caught.
Stealing from rich people is like a treasure hunt. If you can figure out a way to get up there and find the treasure and get away with it, that was something that was intriguing.
For the next decade, Mason managed real estate by day and burglarized the affluent of Cleveland by night. But he began to get restless and decided he wanted more action. In 1972, Bill Mason moved his family to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. It was like turning a kid loose in a candy store.
It's just like a jewel thief's dream, like a treasure trove of people showing off everything they had.
On the east coast of Florida, the motto has always been, if you've got it, flaunt it. And for Mason, that ostentatious lifestyle provided a rationalization for his after-hours work.
If you're flamboyant and showy, I really don't have much reason to feel bad about ripping off your stuff.
The cat burglar settled in and went to work. He had a whole new culture to exploit. And it wouldn't be long before high rollers from Fort Lauderdale to Miami Beach started feeling the Bill Mason effect. Up next, Mason targets the world's richest man. Bill Mason's career as a jewel thief began in his hometown of Cleveland and moved to the east coast of Florida in the early 1970s. During the day, he worked in real estate, a family man devoted to his wife and 3 kids. At night, Mason was a cat burglar with a flair for the dramatic heist. Billionaire industrialist Armand Hammer was often called the world's richest man. For Mason, that made him a perfect target. But the jewel thief was learning the value of patience and careful planning, traits that would become his trademark.
I think I waited a month, maybe 6 weeks, till the timing seemed to be right for me when there was a function coming up, and they were out to dinner.
First, Mason broke into the vacant apartment next door. Then, he climbed out a window onto a narrow ledge that circled the building.
It was a very hairy experience. It was raining very, very hard. I wanted to use the rain to cover any noise I might make, so nobody was on the beach to see me walking around on this ledge. The ledge is probably about 6 to 8 inches wide, maybe. But the ledge was very slippery, and I kept my back solid up against the wall as I went around the ledge, so I could keep my balance.
Once he reached the condo, the rest was remarkably easy.
The patio door was open, unlocked. The alarms were set. The jewelry was all situated in a box on the dressing table. And I was in and out of there in 5 minutes. Never used a tool. And I was back on the street walking up the beach to my car, which was parked about a half a mile up the road, with a great amount of jewelry. I think it was a bit of a game to me to take them down a peg. I mean, they weren't. They weren't. I wasn't taking a pension fund. I mean, you rip off Armand Hammer. I mean, you're not making a dent in the guy's lifestyle.
Mason wasn't bothered by his conscience very often, but one of the jobs he came to regret was the burglary of Johnny Weissmuller, the Olympic athlete turned actor, best known for playing Tarzan.
I shouldn't have hit Johnny Weissmuller. He seemed like a very nice guy, and it was one of the very early on scores when I first moved down to Fort Lauderdale. He was a friend of a neighbor, and he would come over to the neighbor's house and give his Tarzan yell for all the kids.
Mason decided to break in one night when Weissmuller was out to dinner.
So I climbed up the outside of the building, and I went into the apartment, found the jewelry. I just upended everything into a backpack that I was carrying.
Unbeknownst to Mason, the backpack now also contained one item that was invaluable, but only to Johnny Weissmuller.
And when I got home, I discovered that it was an Olympic gold medal in there. I felt very bad about this. I thought about trying to return it to him.
In a rare show of sympathy for one of his victims, Mason decided to send it back.
I mailed it from Atlanta back to him. And it came out in the paper sometime later that he was very grateful someone had returned his gold medal. I suppose he'd have been more grateful if I returned all the rest of the stuff, but I didn't.
Mason still made occasional trips back to Cleveland to fence the stolen gems. And on one of his visits, he noticed that comedian Phyllis Diller was appearing in town. He knew that she never went anywhere without her jewels, and Mason decided he wanted them. He struck Diller's motel room while she was out after cutting the telephone lines.
To make sure that no one reported seeing me going in the building, I had hit a switch box out in the vacant field where I used to watch her, and I didn't know which line was going into the apartment, so I just cut them all. So the poor lady probably had to go quite a distance so she could get a phone to report somebody had robbed her.
Well, tell us what it was like when you discovered everything was missing.
Fantastic. I was getting dressed to go to my first interview of the day, and hurrying like mad, about a minute late, opened the drawer, and it wasn't there. And, you know, at first you just don't take it all in at once.
I realized what a fool I was. It was all in a top drawer of a bureau in a motel. You know, motel, right away the word spelled backwards is rob.
Phyllis Diller lost nearly $500,000 worth of her jewelry.
The main thing about a robbery is the shock that someone has invaded your private space and just ripped through it and taken part of it, the best part, or the expensive part. And you're left with a shambles. Everything is just absolutely, looks like a tornado struck. And it is a nasty feeling.
There was a Cartier watch, gold watch with small diamonds around it, that was inscribed to Phyllis from Bob Hope. And it was unfortunate I couldn't do much with it, but I had to melt it down to the back and sold it as scrap.
He left one great big, that big pin, because he thought it was costume. It was real.
The police were stumped and thought they were dealing with a gang of thieves who never left a clue. Up next, the master jewel thief plans his biggest heist yet. Cat burglar Bill Mason has been fleecing the rich and famous for over a decade, stealing millions of dollars in jewelry from Phyllis Diller, Armand Hammer, even Tarzan. To turn the gems into cash, Mason found eager buyers all over the country. And to make sure he didn't get caught, he was careful to break down the most distinctive pieces.
If it was a well-known piece, something that would be almost custom-made, a bracelet or something from Tiffany's, yes, I would take it apart and sell the stones. You could sell the stones quite easily on 47th Street. People would buy them as fast as you could bring them out.
Instead of fencing the jewelry through pawn shops, Mason went to top New York auction houses, where the very wealthy went to sell their family possessions.
So I talked to Christie's and Sotheby's and William Doyle galleries and told them I had inherited substantial amounts of jewelry and I was thinking about putting them on consignment. They never asked any questions that I know of, and they just accepted it as inherited goods.
To keep that inheritance coming in, Mason needed to steal from the right people. And to find them, all he needed was a newspaper.
I would usually find enough names in the society pages and enough pictures of people wearing huge amounts of jewelry, and I would sort of canvass them, going to society functions.
One of the names that caught Mason's attention was Elizabeth Bender, a prominent Florida socialite. When he learned an event was being held in Bender's honor, Mason donned a tux and pretended that he belonged.
The Bill Mason that I've described as very debonair. He was a handsome man, very athletic, very intelligent and well-spoken. If you've ever seen Cary Grant movie, Bill kind of carried himself like that.
Seeing the quality and the amount of jewelry Bender was wearing, Mason was convinced she had much more in her apartment. He learned that Bender lived alone in an exclusive high-rise in Fort Lauderdale called the Fountainhead. Mason began casing the building.
Most of the high-rise buildings are located close to the beach in Fort Lauderdale. I usually would come down, try to blend in with the crowd as much as possible. I usually didn't sit in one particular location on the beach, just I tried to canvass the building out from different angles, and I wanted to keep moving.
His burglaries were well thought out, showed planning, showed an intellect, and some real thought as to how to get where he needed to be without being found and how to get out of there. And at the same time, he always earmarked locations where he would have a large bang for his buck, so to speak, and get a high return if possible.
I used to go to a lot of new buildings that were opening up. And of course, when they're opening up and have a model suite, they're very happy to give you anything you want and give you the complete layout of the building, the floor plan.
Breaking into the Fountainhead wouldn't be easy, but Mason liked a challenge.
It was pretty well guarded. They had cameras all over the place and doormen.
Mason needed to know more about the Fountainhead security systems and waited for the right opportunity to present itself.
I saw that there was an apartment coming up for sale in the building, and I went over to the real estate people. I told them I was looking for an apartment for my parents who were moving down from Chicago.
Mason asked the agent if he could get a floor plan of the unit that was for rent.
She proceeded to give me not only the floor plan, but the layout of the whole building. I told them my parents were very conscious of security, and the nice real estate lady showed me everything that was available in the building. She took me down to the garage and showed me how the entrances, and there were people in the garage at all times, and she took me out to the pool and showed me all the security precautions out there, the cameras and what have you. So I noted where all the cameras were, and I also noted when I was there 2 grilled windows, which were located out of the range of the cameras.
Mason had found the building's weak point. A few nights later, Elizabeth Bender left the Fountainhead to attend an event. Mason waited on the beach until her limo pulled away. The first step was supposed to be easy. A 25-foot climb up the seawall leading to the Fountainhead's pool deck. The gear he used was surprisingly simple.
I would take large fish hooks and I would weld them together, intertwine fish line, braid it to the rope.
Mason's peak physical condition made the climb itself child's play.
Bill's acrobatics were somewhat legendary. He was very skilled at grappling. He could go up and down a rope, climb walls, drop into spaces that you would think that if someone dropped into, they'd probably break their ankles.
Then, at the very top of the wall, Mason hit a snag. A security guard on a cigarette break. Less than 10 feet away from Mason's exposed grappling hook. The cat burglar was trapped. Dangling nearly 3 stories mid-air, Mason was as close as he'd ever been to getting caught.
I just hung there on the rope. I didn't want to put my fingers up on the edge of the thing or get my arms up, so I'm hanging. I didn't want to drop because I didn't know what he was going to do. I thought maybe just walk around the pool and go back in.
Mason dangled there for what seemed like a lifetime. Finally, the guard finished his cigarette without noticing anything. And the cat burglar was off the hook.
Once he went back inside, I went over the top rail, cut a big slice out of a grill work that was over this window with some small bolt cutters that I had with me, and then crawled in to the ledge that was the windowsill.
The window led into a boiler room. From there, Mason located the stairwell and climbed the stairs to the roof. A locked door presented no problem. He jimmied it with a credit card. Next stop, Elizabeth Bender's terrace, several floors down. Though the apartment's front door was locked and alarmed, the door to the terrace was unlocked, as Mason had expected.
They don't assume that anybody could climb down the side of the building, and I guess the assumption is that thieves would come in through the front door the same way they come in.
Once inside the apartment, Mason headed straight for the bedroom.
And I walked in, found all these heart-shaped diamonds, and was in and out of there in another 10 minutes.
But when Mason started to retrace his steps out of the building, he heard another guard in the stairwell ahead of him. For the second time that night, Mason was trapped. But this time, he was carrying a bag full of stolen gems. Was the cat burglar about to get caught red-handed? Moments after fleeing socialite Elizabeth Bender's high-rise apartment with a bag full of stolen jewelry, Bill Mason finds himself trapped in a stairwell with a security guard just ahead of him.
I couldn't get around him, and he was just poking along. I was thinking if Elizabeth comes home and sets off an alarm, it's not going to be a very good scene.
Spotting an exit rigged with an alarm, Mason decided it was time for speed instead of stealth.
Just hit the alarm, the hell with this noise. And I was out on the beach and back in my car and gone within 30 seconds.
On that night, Bill Mason got away with over $1 million worth of Elizabeth Bender's jewelry. And as always, he went home to his family as if nothing had happened.
I think my family life was very good, but they didn't know anything about what I was doing, and I think the fact that I was hiding these secrets was something that maybe bothered me. It's hard to have secrets all your life. It's hard to keep all this stuff inside of you.
Talk about leading 2 lives. Bill lived with his family in Northeast Fort Lauderdale in a very upper middle class neighborhood. Nice home, very nice wife who had, as far as I could tell, had no idea what he was doing.
He was a great father. He did a lot with his kids, took them boating, took them skiing, went on vacations with them.
I was able to be a good family man when I was home, and I could walk out the door and 5 minutes later be in a whole different frame of mind and be planning a job and concentrate completely on the job.
Mason never discussed his after-hours business with anyone, not even his wife.
I didn't want anybody to know. I thought if as long as I was the only one that knew, nobody's going to talk.
But Mason was also aware that there were people who did want to know. Police at precincts around the country were starting to ask a lot of questions.
I was always under the threat of maybe I was going to get caught. It was a threat that was in the back of my mind.
Bill Mason had always managed to elude the police. But how long will his luck hold out? Bill Mason had a special talent for separating the wealthy from their wealth. His audacious high-wire jewelry heists were capturing headlines, and the Fort Lauderdale police were feeling the pressure.
I commanded a stakeout unit that worked robberies for the most part, but the department was experiencing a rash of burglaries of hotels and condominiums along the beach, and asked if I could spare a couple of guys to try and see if we could locate and identify the person that was responsible.
Two of Detective Gerwin's cops noticed Mason hanging around a hotel and decided to put him under surveillance. Mason didn't notice anything unusual. He wasn't planning a job, and his guard was down. Then, one afternoon, Mason entered a Ramada Inn just to look around. Walking down a corridor, Mason discovered an unlocked room and ducked inside for a quick look. He had no idea that plainclothes policemen were right behind him.
He was in there for probably 3 or 4 minutes. Then he exited the room, he walked out the door, and we took him into custody at that point.
Well, they threw me down on the ground, and they're kneeling on top of me, and my mind started whirling. I never said a word. I didn't say this is a mistake, or what the hell you doing, or I didn't say anything.
He had ransacked the room pretty well, but he actually didn't take anything, which under Florida law makes it a little sticky in terms of burglary, because he didn't steal anything. But we did find burglar tools on him. He had lockpicks on him. He had several hotel keys, master keys.
When police searched his home, they found $40,000 in jewelry, which they weren't sure they could trace. And Mason wasn't talking.
He was smart, and he understood our judicial system, and he was smart enough not to make statements, and he kept things close to his vest. So when he sits back and he's listening intently, he's analyzing and thinking about what is his answer going to be if he's going to answer at all. And back then, Bill didn't give a lot of answers.
The police still had no idea who they were dealing with. Eager to get unsolved cases off the books, they offered Mason a deal: immunity in exchange for information.
If I would tell them where the jewelry came from, they would just close the cases and not charge me with anything. If I didn't tell them and they could prove where it came from, they would charge me with at least receiving stolen property.
Mason agreed to the deal: immunity for any crimes he confessed to that day. But instead of taking the rap for a few unremarkable hotel burglaries, Mason astonished the police by providing details on dozens of high-profile cases, including the Armand Hammer and Phyllis Diller jobs that had netted him millions of dollars.
And it got immunity for them. I mean, they never could charge me with them then, and I figured I was safe and sound.
Mason was charged with possession of burglary tools and spent 77 days in jail. Then when he got out, he committed a parole violation that would have landed him back behind bars. So Mason and his wife decided he should leave his family and skip town. Bill Mason was now a wanted man.
For the first couple of years, I would say I was pretty paranoid. I was constantly moving from one locale to another.
Eventually, Mason ended up back in his hometown of Cleveland, where once again he landed a job managing apartment buildings. Old friends were there to help him.
He was on the run. He took my brother's social security number and his identity, and it was no big deal. My brother didn't mind, we didn't mind. He was always a good friend. If I needed something, he was always there. I had no problem with what he did on the side.
By this time, Mason's life of crime had severely damaged his marriage. He and his wife were separated. Out on the town one night in Cleveland, he ran into a woman from his high school. Her name was Fran Loveman.
He was the manager of my in-laws' apartment building, and I walked up to him and I said to him, "Hi, I know you. You're Bill Mason." And he said, "Oh, no, I'm not." And I thought, this guy's crazy. "I know he's Bill Mason. I know you're Bill Mason," I said. I think I just assumed he was a drug dealer. Just because he was from South Florida and he had that look of someone that was not on the straight and narrow.
Mason finally admitted who he was, and Fran began to get an inkling of his shady past.
I wasn't really thinking with my head. I was thinking with my heart, and I fell in love with a very exotic, dark, different man and picked up and left with him.
Mason was trying to stay out of trouble, but when he heard Fran's family talking about some extremely wealthy friends of theirs, the Mandels, the cat burglar couldn't resist the bait. Mason started casing the Mandels' condo building. Then one night when the Mandels were out to dinner with Fran's parents, Mason breezed into their building.
I came up to the door and I just timed it so that whoever it was allowed them to come in, and I just sort of rolled in with them.
Then he made his way up to the roof. Uncoiling a mountain climbing rope from under his shirt, he lowered himself into the atrium of the building. From there, breaking into the Mandels' apartment was a snap. Once inside, he cleaned the Mandels out. Over $1 million worth of jewelry gone. Once again, Mason had left no clues linking him to the burglary. But the noose around the fugitive's neck was beginning to tighten. Even the FBI was now involved. Mason tried to keep a low profile, but one day he happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time.
A guy that had known me from school saw me, and he was also a friend of a fellow named Arthur Krinsky, who was an FBI agent.
I was assigned to the Cleveland division of the FBI and developed information through an informant that Bill Mason was in town and was wanted.
He knew that I was a fugitive. I didn't think he really saw me. I had a beard and I looked a little bit different. I walked out of the hardware store and I saw him sitting in a car reading a pack of sandpaper. I should have known something was up.
A few days later, the FBI arrested Mason and searched the home he shared with Fran.
We found jewelry. We found 2 police radios that were determined to have been stolen. We found a fictitious U.S. passport and, of course, lockpicks.
Throughout the house, we found $99,500. I was in the kitchen. I opened the kitchen cabinet and I found an oil can. I said, why would a Pennzoil oil can be in a kitchen cupboard? Took it out, it felt a little light. And I think it was a custom made. So wait, let me see that. We're fooling, we opened it, it had a false bottom. And of course there were earrings in it and a ring.
They also recovered a damning piece of evidence that investigators knew had been stolen from Phyllis Diller.
One, which was 100% my fault, was an address book of Phyllis Diller's, which he had shown me, and I just was dumbfounded at what was in that little phone book, the phone number of the president, Ford, the phone number of Bob Hope, and I said, this is amazing, you should keep it. We shouldn't have kept it.
Phyllis Diller's address book, it was so comprehensive. And she said they had a lifetime of her friends and her contacts in it, and she was totally lost without it.
Bill Mason was under arrest. Had the cat burglar finally used up all 9 lives? Or would he also be able to wriggle out of this one? Master jewel thief Bill Mason's amazing run had come to an end. He was arrested and sent back to Florida to serve out the prison term he'd run away from 4 years earlier.
People don't seem to think that 3.5 years in prison is a long time for what I've done. But to me, it was an endless amount of time. I do not like prison.
After serving his time, Mason was a free man. But burglary wasn't quite out of his system.
The planning and the execution became the adrenaline rush. Once the adrenaline stopped, it was like, what's next? How do you get that high again? You plan another job.
Bill started reading the society pages again. Just for fun, he told himself. He'd read about a wealthy woman who lived in Naples, Florida, and decided to see what her place looked like from the outside.
I got this wild, rambunctious idea that I was just going to look it over, and I went up on the roof. I saw that they were out, and I must have gone crazy. I thought, okay, maybe it's just one last quick shot. I didn't have any tools with me or anything, no rope, no anything. And I tried to stretch a ladder that I had found on the roof down the side of the building and balance it on the rail.
But the ladder wasn't quite long enough to reach. And as Mason started down, it slipped off the railing.
And I was hanging about 18 stories up by my fingernails. Looking down and watching that ladder tumble down through there and bang into patios and thinking, boy, that'd be me coming down through there. And this is not the way I want to go.
Hearing that ladder fall was such a shock to him and so frightening to him. And he's not a religious man at all, but he came home and just said to himself, that's got to be a sign.
I could still picture that ladder going down through there. I mean, sometimes I'd lay in bed at night and I'd close my eyes and watch that ladder falling down through there.
Mason took it as a sign that it was time to get out of the game, once and for all. The cat burglar had hung up his grappling hook for good. Today, Bill Mason and Fran Loveman live in New York and run a legitimate costume jewelry business. Since getting out of prison, Mason has managed to stay out of trouble. But not everyone agrees that justice was served for such a high-profile thief.
When I prosecuted him, I thought justice was done to the degree that we could establish a case with the evidence that we had. Was Bill deserving of more serious incarceration and a much lengthier sentence? Based on what he has admitted to, his own self-admission, certainly he probably should have been in prison for the rest of his life.
He never really tried to harm anybody. I don't think he's ever been to a point where he roughed anybody up to get what he wanted. He always had enough class to do it quietly.
I mean, there's some people that I'm sure I hurt devastated. It was an invasion of their privacy. And there's some people I don't give a damn about.
I couldn't even believe he would try to do one more last shot. Doesn't mean he doesn't think about it, but he wouldn't.
At my age now, I'd say the price is too high. This has cost me a tremendous amount. It's cost me a tremendous amount of my freedom. It cost me a nice family. It's cost me a very devoted wife. But if I was 25 again, I might do the same damn thing over again.
Blood, sweat,